Season 9 of Night School is presented by the AQHA. Watch and wager on the Heritage Place Futurity card Saturday at Remington Park. Keeneland Select. New players can earn a $150 sign-up bonus. Woodbine. Live racing continues at Woodbine and Woodbine Mohawk Park. Queen's Plate Day is Saturday, June 29th. Remington Park. Catch all the action on closing weekend of the quarter horse meet that includes the blockbuster Heritage Place Futurity card and Express Bet. Get 5 times reward points every Friday when betting the Stronach 5.
Horses have off days, and by looking at them before they actually get on the racetrack, you get an initial impression of which way they're leaning.
This is going to sound crazy, but for me, it's intellectual stimulation.
Class is now in session. It's time for Night School. Here are your hosts.
We have the need for speed in your handicapping and playing the races. It's a key component. Welcome to Night School Season 9. I'm Jeremy Plonk as we roll through 20 topics in horse racing throughout the course of this 2019 season. But is any of them more important than the speed of a racehorse? We'll talk about the intricacies of that throughout the course of this Night School episode. But the man who literally wrote the book on speed, Andy Beyer of the Washington Post and the Beyer Speed Figures, he's been a guest in Night School many times over the years. We've been a guest in his home in a video segment for Night School that you can check out at YouTube. Andy sets the table for our discussion on speed.
To me, the purpose of them is very simple. It's to show who ran faster than whom in the horse's previous starts. You know, when you pick up the racing form and see one horse ran 7 furlongs and 124 at Aqueduct, and another horse ran 6 furlongs and 110 4/5 at Belmont, and you're trying to compare the two, it's practically impossible to do. So the idea of figures is to translate every horse's performance into a number that expresses how fast they ran. I mean, and how fast horses run, I think, is almost self-evidently the single most important factor in handicapping. But we all know there are dozens, hundreds of factors that can go into into influencing the outcome of a race. I never aspired to, make speed figures anything more than speed figures. When I started handicapping seriously and using them, I just wanted the number to answer all the questions about who was faster than whom, and then I could look at the other factors and relate it to the time. But I think that I guess maybe in my early days I had envisioned the idea of maybe I could have a number that told you everything about a horse. That's not realistic. But I think that good speed figures can and do answer that one crucial question: how fast did the horse run?
We'll hear more from Andy later in our Night School Vault, but it's time to bring in my partner on the Night School podcast, Brian W. Spencer, general manager, a horse player now. Brian, we're talking about speed, and speed figures, obviously a big part of that. But in the general discussion of speed, why do races not just go to the fastest horse?
And that's sort of one of the things is, speed figures. Andy Beyer talks about sort of what their purpose is, what they're trying to do by trying to assign a number to how fast a horse got from point A to point B, and then we can use those figures, incorporate them into our handicapping going forward. But, races are not run in a vacuum. Horses are not, they do not break out of the gate and run unbothered from start to finish. So the question is incorporating speed figures and how fast a horse can run, but also including everything else that's going to be going on around them. How is the pace going to affect them? How is the weather going to affect them? There's so many other intangibles, but still, when it comes down to it, speed figures, a very, very crucial part of helping determine which horses that we might want to bet.
A couple things about just the dynamics of the way horse races are run here in the U.S., most of our racing on dirt, about, maybe a third of it on the grass, a quarter of it on the turf. But when you look at dirt racing, the first quarter of any dirt race will almost always be the fastest fraction of the race, and the races get slower as the race progresses. So horses are running at their absolute full bore from the starting gate in dirt races. Even a come-from-behind horse almost assuredly will run the fastest quarter-mile split of that particular horse's race in the first quarter. They may be 10 lengths off the pace, and they're still running faster the first quarter than they are at the end of the race. It's a visual anomaly, if you will, a misconception that people have that horses who come from behind in races are running faster at the end. They're just running a more sustained pace. Maybe they were going 23 seconds the first quarter, and in the last quarter they're only going 25 seconds, whereas the front runners may be going 26, 27 seconds the last quarter of a mile. So that deceleration of the front runners is just happening more rapidly than from the come from behind horses who are able to sustain the pace. So I think when it comes to the speed of races, and when you talk about why doesn't just the fastest horse win a race, that's why. Yes, everybody's trying their hardest from the opening bell, but some horses simply can't sustain that. And when they get later in a race, it's not that they're not trying any harder. They're still trying their hardest. That's when the jockeys are moving and shifting their weight and going to the stick and doing everything they can to push these horses in the laborious stretch run to try to finish. It's a lot more effort going out at the end of the race, even though they're not going as fast. So being able to measure this and putting them from the finish to the start to the finish, and just how fast they can go, it's not point A to point B. Now, our friends at the American Quarter Horse Association, if you bet AQHA racing, those races are simply about speed. You get a clean trip, you're all in the same starting gate, head down the track, they pop the gate, gone. Speed and speed ratings are so much more important than quarter horse racing, than thoroughbred racing, because there's so many fewer factors involved. It is about pure speed. But when we talk about the thoroughbred racing and we get to the turf even, speed changes. Brian, turf races aren't run the same way as we have on dirt.
Yeah, and that's why, turf figures can be a little bit more difficult to work with because the race flows are completely different. You talked about American dirt racing, fast, early, slow, late, even though the horses are still trying really hard in the lane. In turf racing, by and large, they're going to be slower early and faster late, especially if we're talking about turf routes. Turf sprints might be a little bit more, speed focused, but especially in those long-term turf race or those marathon turf races, how often do you see horses just kind of bunching up? Looks like they're barely doing anything through the first turn, and then all of a sudden they quicken. And that's just a sort of product of the race flow in the way that turf races are run. But also when we try to work those in with figures and incorporate them into our handicapping, that can also make a figure maker's job a little bit more difficult because they sometimes have to make adjustments for the fact that races start off so slow on the turf here in the United States. But I think that one of the things too to remember is that if you're trying to incorporate figures into your handicapping, it doesn't matter which service you're using, there are lots of good speed figure services out there. They're going to be one of the biggest negative drivers in price. A horse with really good speed figures that you found, guess what? Everybody else found them too. So a horse with great speed figures going to be over bet. So I think this is still another one of those things we talk a lot, Jeremy, on Night School about how all of these angles are sort of tools in a toolbox. And I think that speed and speed figures and incorporating them into your handicapping, just another one of them, but obviously one of the more important ones.
They're not simplistic, but their presentation is. When we talk about speed or a performance figure, 85 is better than 80. And to put a bold number in the past performances and say this whole race adds up to this number can make a bold statement to a horse player out there. And they'll look at those numbers, and that is how they become so influential on the tote board. But just achieving that 85 number or that 90 number, how the figure maker goes about it, no matter which service you're talking about, Brisk, force, time form. You got the performance figures like Ragozin. You've got the Beyers that we talked about. Equibase has speed figures. They're all trying to do the same thing, which is to take the clocking of the race, the official track time, and then adjust it for how fast or slow the racetrack was playing that day, known as the track variant. And the difference between one figure and another when we're talking about speed figures and speed ratings simply is many times what the difference is in the assumption of the track variant. One service will tell you that the track was this slow based on average, and another one will tell you it was this slow based on average. And the difference in that variant is how you get a couple points difference in from one figure to another based on the different companies. That variant making is really the special sauce involved in making a speed figure, and how they do that and how they adjust times throughout the day becomes really the art in making the figure as much as the science and the hard mathematics of it. The track variant can be, how fast or slow a track is, can be adjusted by things like weather, gap between races. Maybe it's been 2 hours since there's been 2 races on the dirt, and that surface has changed based on maintenance and weather and conditions like that can make a track go faster or slower throughout the course of the day. All races in 110 flat for 6 furlongs are not made the same, Brian.
Yeah, and one of the main things, too, that I think sometimes that we get a little bit sort of forgetful of is just the idea that, past speed or performance figures are obviously a huge tool in our kit in handicapping races, but the patterns in figures can be as important to me as the actual numbers themselves, because remember, in the end, what we're trying to do is not talk about what the horse did 3 weeks ago or 6 weeks ago. The name of the game is to get paid by figuring out what these horses are going to do today. So the patterns in figures, do horses kind of zig and zag out of, form cycles that you can really see? And I promise you, a lot of times you can see them on paper, based on the speed figures that have been assigned to them. So I think that using those patterns and then trying to incorporate those patterns into projecting what happens in the race today, where does today's race fall on that horse's form pattern? You can really see that a lot in a lot of these speed figures, and I think that's very useful in trying to get yourself paid at the races that day.
And incorporating those speed figures with some of the other factors that you use in your handicapping is not only good work for you, it's done by some of the aces themselves. When I had a chance to sit down with Andy Beyer in his Washington, D.C. home several years ago for our night school program, he was trip handicapping Tampa Bay Downs that day. And I said, Andy, you of all people, why are you trip handicapping? He said, because I want to see how the figure was achieved. Did this horse get the 80 figure easily and have an easy go of it, or did this horse have to work hard and achieve the 80 in a dogfight? So all 80s are not created equal. An 80 in a dogfight versus an 80 with absolutely no pressure, you want the dogfight 80. So again, using these speed figures, they will tell you this is how fast the race was that day, but how was the figure achieved? That's something that you can take and separate yourselves from the pack, because everybody just looking at that raw number, like Brian said, may all gravitate to this horse because the number's higher than the others. But how did they achieve that number? That can be a way that you separate yourself from the pack.
Yeah, and I think that another really good use, and it really comes into how those numbers are achieved and how they're calculated as well. One of the biggest uses for speed and performance ratings for me is just to eliminate horses, to find horses who, barring some unforeseen circumstances of a ton of other horses misfiring or a out of the blue career best performance, a lot of these speed ratings and performance ratings, they'll generally give you a good idea of simply which horses are too slow to win.
Put them in clumps, the ones who can and the ones who can't. Eliminating contenders, a big part of your handicapping. Maybe the figures can help you do that as well. Let's go into the Night School Vault with more from none other than Andy Beyer, creator of the Beyer Speed Figures. And after we talk with Andy, we'll have Caton Bredar, the First Lady of Night School, join us for her thoughts on speed.
Pick bet, and cheer on live racing from Woodbine and Mohawk Park. Thoroughbred and harness action. The wagers are just the beginning. Watch award-winning broadcasts covering both breeds, incredible battles contested over the most unique grass course in North America. Experience the full fields with over 130 thoroughbred and 160 live harness days. Get access to free handicapping material and join the ranks of Woodbine and Mohawk Park players from all over the globe. For more information, visit woodbine.com.
Strategize, analyze, select. Join Keeneland Select to bet on racing from around the world on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, anytime, anywhere. Featuring the best rewards in racing, free past performances, live video, race replays, and more. Plus, Keeneland Select invests a portion of its profits back into the sport. Join Keeneland Select today and earn a $150 sign-up bonus at KeenelandSelect.com. Dedicated to the sport and dedicated to the players.
Some folks like to bet on the horses. Some like to bet on the games. Some folks like to bet on their phone. And some like to bet from their suite. So what's your best bet? All of the above. No matter how you like to bet, Remington Park is your best bet yet. With world-class horse racing, OKC's newest casino, and online suite booking now available. Remington Park, it's your best bet yet.
Hey, what's going on? Mikey here, and I'm going to tell you about an offer from my good friends at ExpressBet. Let's be honest, we know you love playing the races, but you can't always make it to the track. Sometimes life just gets in the way of a good bet. Well, what if I told you about a place where you never miss a bet and you start with house money? You'd say I'm crazy, right? Well, not at ExpressBet. Your first $100 are on them. That's right. Sign up with expressbet.com using promo code XBRadio, bet $100, and they'll deposit $100 back into your account the very next day. Hey, plus you could get an extra $25 if you use Express Fund Direct Deposit. You see what I mean? House money for betting the races. It's that easy. Check it out at expressbet.com to learn more. And don't forget to sign up with promo code XBRadio. You're gonna love it. And that's a Mikey guarantee. Must be 18 years or older and 21 years old in certain states to open an account with ExpressBet and reside in a state where such activity is legal. Void where prohibited. National Gambling Support Line 800-522-4700.
Welcome back to the show. Enjoy this classic night school clip from the vault.
It's easier to make accurate figures on the dirt. I mean, there are pitfalls in turf and synthetics, and they are almost all caused by pace. We know in synthetic track races, you look at Keeneland, you look at a lot of tracks, Golden Gate, where you just see like ridiculous slow paces, particularly in route races, sometimes even in sprints. And the same phenomenon happens on grass as well. And when the pace of a race gets so extremely slow, the horses can't accelerate enough at the end to run the final time of which they're really capable. This almost never happens on dirt. If you get horses going a half in 49, in a route race, they'll just run faster at the end, and a horse who's supposed to run a figure of 100 will run around 100. But when you get them going a half in 52 at Golden Gate, they're never gonna make that up, and so it creates a difficult element in making figures in these races. And in many cases we have to kind of superimpose kind of an arbitrary judgment on making the figures, because I see no point in putting down and publishing numbers that have nothing to do with the horse's ability. And if you have horses who could who are supposed to be running figures around 90, and because of the slow pace, the race comes up a 68, to put down unpublished 68, helps nobody.
Welcome back in. Going to close out the show with our visit from Caton Bredar, and earlier in the episode, Jeremy and I touched briefly on the idea of speed figures and performance figures and how we might put those to use in our handicapping, but we wanted to have Caton Bredar talk a little bit more about the distinction between a speed figure and a performance figure, and in the situations in which a performance figure might be a little bit more useful, or how or when you might choose to use those types of figures in your handicapping, Caton.
Well, it's interesting, too, when we talk speed figures or performance figures, most of the time you're talking about a figure that's assigned to a past effort. Now, if it's speed, we're talking about the raw speed and the, how fast horses are running. If you're talking about performance figures, you're incorporating other factors into it, as well as trip, class, the factors that I use for handicapping. So for me, a performance rating is a bit more useful than a speed rating. But in any respect, most of the numbers that we use or that we see, and especially the numbers that are provided, I don't want to say free, but automatically with your past performance information. For instance, a Beyer speed figure that's in the past performances that you look at in daily racing form. That number is talking about what the horse has already done. What our job is to anticipate or figure what a horse is going to do, right, the next time around. So the idea of those figures in any case is to be able to be compared, one horse to another. But you still have to figure out what that means for today. The figures that I use, which are speed figures, but they incorporate some other intangibles or other factors into them. I use Thorough Manager, and they put together what they call a projected speed rating. And that projected speed rating is what they believe through analytics and a computer-generated number, primarily based on times, but also other factors, what they think the horse will run today. And you still have to temper it with what you know. For instance, what factors are going into that number. What I've found, for instance, in the case of Thorough Manager, is that the projected speed rating, which is a really good number and which I'll use to pare down the field, puts a lot of emphasis on the last race, more emphasis on the last race than the other races cumulatively. So I have to look at the last race and say to myself, well, is that changing the number, or is there a reason why maybe I shouldn't use this number quite as strongly as would otherwise be the case? But the way I use whether it's Beyer speed figures or performance ratings or projected speed ratings, the way I use any information like that is as one of many bits and pieces of information. I may use it to pare down the field and looking and saying, well, you know what? You have to have been able to have a number this good to be a contender. And past that, I think you have to then incorporate your own handicapping devices. I just can't boil it down to one number. A lot of people do. A lot of people live and die by the number itself. I think there's a lot more intangibles and it's a lot more complicated than that. But whatever you're using, if you're using those, I think that what's important is to know or factor in what accounts for the number. And are there some variables that today might make that number less important, or maybe it's inflated, or maybe it's exactly the same as the situation was when they put in that good performance or that good number?
And all throughout Season 9 here, we're seeing it that each of these pieces of the handicapping and wagering process, just one tool in the toolbox, and Caton giving us an idea of how those speed figures can be put to use, and also reminding us that how a figure is earned can be almost as important as the figure itself. So make sure to, just weave those speed figures into your handicapping process. We're going to close out this episode. We'll be back next week to close out the first semester of Season 9 of Night School. Next week, we'll be talking trifectas. Good night.
Next on FAQ 60, workouts. Horses don't hit the gym like humans, but they do hit the track on a near daily basis for exercise. When that exercise is advanced, track clockers will time the move, and it's labeled an official workout. Less developed exercise is called a jog or a gallop, and not timed, but rather used to build fitness. Timed workouts are either from the starting gate or on the fly, which means they're clocked with a running start. Workouts from the gate, labeled with a G in your program, will be slower on the clock because of the standing start, but are much more important to a handicapper. Pay closer attention to workouts with horses who've been away from the races for more than a month, as they may tip their level of fitness. And also with debut runners who exit training races, which you can consider a quarter horse dress rehearsal. This FAQ 60 is brought to you by AQHA Racing and Horse Player Now.
Enjoyed tonight's episode? Check out hundreds of past archives at horseplayernow.com.